Check out the Alternative Games Twitter account, link in the description.
Hello and welcome to a new video, and indeed welcome to an episode of Ham Says. Today's topic we're going to be talking about 2D games, just like games with 2D art styles, completely 2D games. So recently they've been having sort of a simultaneous renaissance and also they're in decline in some ways. So obviously AAA publishers, this has been going on literally since the early 2000s, have been less and less using 2D art styles, to the point where there are sometimes some years go by without a single AAA game using a hand-drawn or sprite-based art style. Indie developers use them a lot, but often they have to opt for the retro look, and that's often due to budget constraints. But I just think it's very interesting because since we've got the technology now to make any 2D art style we could possibly dream of, obviously you could enhance them with 4K and whatnot, but you really are not prohibited from using any art style through 2 dimensions by the current hardware. It's weird that the companies don't use this more, but the only ones that really tried it were Ubisoft, that I can think of. There are the odd game that's come since, like a Box Boy from Nintendo. Tell me down below in the comments if you can think of any others, but basically that's really the only major initiative was the UbiArt kind of thing, the UbiArt engine, and that made Rayman Origins, Rayman Legends, Child of Light and Valiant Hearts possible. It's kind of interesting to see how they progressed. So at the start there was Rayman Legends, which from what I can tell had a decent level of success. But then there was Rayman Legends, which was much less successful, and it led Ubisoft to kind of take the line that, oh, you know, people think they're not getting bang for their buck when they're making a 2D game, so we'll just do them, you know, kind of as digital downloads. And I'm not really sure what happened with Child of Light and Valiant Hearts, but after that the Ubi games just seemed to stop. There wasn't any more 2D games, which was weird. But it does show that they thought, oh, you know, nobody's going to pay for a full retail version, and so the only physical version you can get of Child of Light was a Vita version that launched at like 20 quid, and as if anyone's going to buy it on the Vita, because most of the people who play games on that play them digitally. It's just not really a platform where you buy you know, physical games that much. So really, I think the root of this problem comes back to Rayman Legends. That game initially started out as a Wii U exclusive, because I think it did very well on the original Wii, the original Rayman Origins. So it had a lot of features built around the Wii U's unique capabilities. So like, for example, you could use this guy Murphy, who's a character in the game, and you could do various touch puzzles, and they were fun. But the problem was, because of the initial very lackluster sales of the Wii U, they kind of got cold feet, Ubisoft. They didn't commit, and that soured a couple of Nintendo fans on it, which is probably one of the contributing factors, one of the many contributing factors to why the game didn't receive the success it probably deserved. There was also the fact that there seemed to be bits that were cut from it. For example, there was meant to be a story, but there's just weird bits in it. Well, there's a level I can think of specifically called Save Barbara, and spoilers, you don't save Barbara in it. You just play the level, and once you've completed it, you unlock Barbara as a character. It's not even a thing where you could have broken up in a cage and she just jumps out, or there's just a 5-second cutscene where you see her at the end and she's there. There's just no attempt to tie it all together, and that would be fine if there didn't seem to be a story. For basically, there was a story, but it seems like a lot of it had been cut, or they just didn't bother with it, which is annoying. There was also the fact that when it was ported to PS3 and Xbox 360, some of the outlets that were reviewing the 360 and PS3 versions gave it bad reviews because it just had all these Murphy sections which were designed to be played on a touchscreen. but you just control them with like one button. It was like the square button on the PlayStation. And so what would happen would be you would just walk up to like this, blockade, and you'd have to press square, and Murphy would do things to it. And sometimes he wouldn't even do the right thing, because if two of the touch puzzles were too close together, he wouldn't be able to do it. And that's just not fun, because it meant you were usually doing a bit of platforming, then you press square, then you start platforming again, and then you press square, and it just broke it all up, and it didn't add anything. But they couldn't have they didn't have the budget to redesign all these Murphy sections, and they didn't basically couldn't have cut content from the game. I mean, it would have been pretty obvious then that the Wii U was a far superior version, and when you've kind of committed to making a port of a game, you don't really want to leave them with less than the other version. But I know Rayman Legends, it does have a ton of content, by the way. If you ever want to check that game out, I may sound like I'm harping on it here, but it's a very fun game, and it is what is in there is just great. Especially if you play it on either the Wii U or the Vita, because they have the touchscreen, so you could use the kind of various tools and the Murphy stuff. But that all seemed to dry up because it just seemed like it wasn't selling well enough, and I think the idea that the conclusion that Ubisoft came to, and the conclusion that I think many other people think, is that they're getting less bang for their buck. I don't think that's entirely true. I think there's, it's 2D games are less marketable sometimes, they're kind of more niche in certain ways, so you need to very carefully balance how you're developing your game and how you're marketing it, and it's the same with animation. Do I think 2D games are going, in the AAA sense, are going to die out? I don't think so. Certainly there have to be lessons learned from games like Yoshi's New Island was one that Nintendo made recently, and the game just looks putrid. They tried to emulate the style of the original Yoshi's Island, and it just does not look good when it's being made in 3D models. So I really think it's gonna happen as the medium matures a bit, and as we kind of eventually, people will kind of see 3D CGI as the norm, so a 2D animation could well look like more of a spectacle, and certainly there's room for 2D to re-enter the market, because animes and whatever are more lucrative and ubiquitous in Japan than live action stuff. If you look in Japan, they make far more animated movies than they do live action ones, as opposed to over in the West, where we seem to just be obsessed with live action mixed with dibs of CGI. And I think it's certainly something that once we've kind of mastered 3D, I think we may see some developers starting to go back to 2D, because it's kind of a thing with the game industry, especially, not so much with the animation industry, although they may come back eventually, that basically you're always getting given more and more technology, and developers are constantly trying to see what they can do with that. And so in this generation we've seen it's led to a rise in a lot more open world games, because they're quicker and easier to make, and they run a lot better on the new hardware. But back in the day it was all about graphics, and I think eventually when you master a particular graphical style, like when we get to the point where technology isn't so much of a barrier and we could essentially for the most part create whatever the heck we want, we'll eventually start to come back to, would this game work better in a 2D art style, or would it work better in a 3D art style? For example, like Mighty Number 9 maybe should have been a 2D game, because certainly the concept art looked very cool, and if they had just animated that correctly, you could have actually made a very interesting game out of that. If it was 2D, it would have looked maybe a lot better. Same thing with, I think, Bloodstained recently. They showed kind of the game in action, and there's some 3D elements dabbled in, and honestly I don't think it looks as good with the 3D elements, but some people like that. I think Bloodstained will still be a great game, but certainly 2D it has a lot more merit than I think a lot of people realize, and I think eventually people will come around to it. But anyway, tell me what you think of 2D art styles down in the comments below. Please like the video if you liked it, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.